Millions of Americans are sweating over one of the most intrusive and convoluted processes known to mankind. The IRS is in high gear as it prepares to process tax returns. Everyone uses software, but what if artificial intelligence could cut through the tax tangle? Federal Drive host Tom Temin spoke to someone who thinks that's a distinct possibility. He's professor at the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University, Tinglong Dai.
And I want to talk about the IRS, which has this massive processing problem, and there's lots of automated rules that check if returns are correct. But you studied how AI could help in this process. What are some of your thoughts here?
Well, first of all, it's helpful to define what AI is. So artificial intelligence is definitely more than just ChatGPT that most people are familiar with these days. The field has been there for almost 70 years. You can think of many different kinds of AI. You have rule-based AI. If you can feed your machine all sorts of tax rules, deductions, or laws, regulations, constraints, and it will figure things out, that's kind of AI can be very useful, very, very reliable, very transparent, very easy to audit, very easy to figure out what went wrong. Problem with the traditional rule-based AI is that it's a little bit too rigid. It's hard to do things in a flexible way, especially when you have flexible formatted data, such as images, speeches, and all data from many different sources. So then you have more recent kind of predictive AI, which, by the way, includes all the OCR technology. You take picture of your W-2 form, it figures out the numbers, it transmits those numbers into the tax software, and that has become very, very reliable due to advances in computer vision over the past 10 years or so. And then more recently, the kind of AI everyone gets excited about, obviously, is ChatGPT, the kind of large language models that can accommodate more complex, more flexible kind of forms. If anything, I think large language models will definitely prove very helpful. We added to the AI toolboxes that IRS and all the tax prep software companies, most consumers are already using these days. And we just make the process even more efficient and more reliable.
And you mentioned OCR capabilities that are up to date, because OCR has been around a long time, but handwriting is really the tough part for OCR. And although handwriting OCR has actually been around for probably 25, 30 years anyway, the Postal Service uses it. But in the predictive model, then, it sounds as if that could help speed those returns that are still paper, as opposed to those that are electronic.
Especially when you think about tons of receipts, tons of invoices, bills, and of different forms. Yeah, you mentioned handwriting. These days, you do not need to handwriting. But sometimes it's just that the formats of the files, not what the software they're used to. Sometimes it gets numbers wrong. The other day, I tried to use my phone to scan my US passport. It got the expiration date wrong. It says expiration year was 2051. That's not possible. Nobody has a passport that expires in 2051, right? So even something as basic as 3 and 5, you got it wrong. And that was printed on US passport, right? And this is 2024. So this is one areas that large language models can be helpful, because if you combine GPT technology, such as ChatGPT, with OCR, with computer vision, you could figure out, 2051 doesn't make sense. 2031 makes more sense.
Right. And when you get to the ChatGPT, the problem with that for most people is the fact that it's trained with more data than a specific application would want it to be trained with. And if you limit your large language models to the data that's pertinent, you'll probably get more consistent results.
Correct. Yeah, so most of large language models that the consumers use these days are off the shelf. They have already been developed by large companies like Microsoft, Google, Facebook. But what they are not doing is that they have not been trained for the specific purposes, such as tax preps. So that means for these models to be useful, they need to be fine-tuned. You need to feed them with the kind of rules that necessary needed for tax preps. But the other challenge here is actually that there are they're like human beings in the sense that they're really good at figuring out what's plausible, what makes sense, what doesn't. But they make up a lot of stuff, right? So like Tom, you and I were speaking now, we make up a lot of things. In a sense, it's not like we make up things on purpose. It's just that you're never sure. If I ask you, what was your AGI last year, you probably would make up something, right? Because unless you actually look up your records, you wouldn't know exact numbers. That's also the challenge with large language models is that they make up stuff. Sometimes what they make up happens to be true. That is good. A lot of times they could hallucinate. And also they're not really good at calculating stuff, just like we humans, right? And other than, addition, multiplication, we are very bad at calculating things.
We're speaking with Tinglong Dai. He's professor at the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University. And getting back to rule-based AI, of course, the tax code is thousands of pages, and there are literally, there are unlimited variables. I guess somebody could count the variables, but I think there's unlimited numbers of variables in tax return data. So when does rule-based logic, simply saying if-and types of calculations, even millions of them, change from being just regular logic to becoming artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's actually one of the central questions in artificial intelligence is actually to figure out how to make those rules work. And if certain rules are written on the paper, that's the easy part. But if you actually talk to a tax expert, if you observe them for a week or for a month or a year, you will know that certain unwritten rules, there are certain rules are not written because there are all sorts of ambiguities, right? And how do we make a determination about one kind of deduction versus the other? How do you decide what should be filling the particular part of the form? Which form do you choose? It's not always black and white. There's tons of ambiguity. So that's where you need human expertise. So a part of a central challenge in artificial intelligence between 1950s to 1990s, or even now, this kind of rule-based AI is to trying to infer those rules based on your observation of how experts reason, how experts decide, how experts act. So that's actually a central challenge, but it's fair to say we have made progress in that area a lot. The reason rule-based AI hasn't been as useful as it could be, it is not because that figuring out the rules or codifying rules, or as Tom, as you mentioned, is if then clauses. That part, we're very, very good at it. The part we're not really good at is actually the part of understanding data, understanding a lot of unstructured data, especially when you look at the images, speeches and natural language. That is part of the rule-based AI they're really bad at. They're not really good at processing all sorts of inputs. They're also not very good at generating outputs that make sense, that is actually very useful to users. That was really the reason that rule-based AI hasn't quite taken off. But when you combine rule-based AI with large language models, with computer vision models, they can be very, very useful.
Tinglong Dai is a professor at the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University, speaking there with Federal Drive host Tom Temin. There's more to this interview. You can find it at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. You can also subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.